So we started this chapter on options and futures in the last class. We want to discuss options and futures because they are really important in risk management. First, let's review these basic concepts. So when we talk about options, we could have two kinds of options: call option or put option. And if you have a call option, then you have the right to buy a certain asset at the strike price before or on the expiration date. And if you're a buyer of a put option, then you will have the right to sell an asset at the strike price on or before the expiration date. Of course, if you're the buyer or the seller of options, then you will have the obligation to fill your promise. It's very important for you to understand how to calculate option payoffs. So let's say ST is the stock price at expiration and X is the exercise price. Then, if you're a call option holder, if ST is larger than the exercise price, then you will want to exercise your call option. So your profit would be ST minus X. And if ST is smaller than the exercise price, then as a call option holder, you will not exercise your call option. Instead, you will let the call option expire. So your payoff is just 0. And then, as a put option holder, if the stock price is larger than the exercise price, then you will not exercise your put option. So your payoff is just 0. And if the stock price is smaller compared with the market price, if the stock price is smaller compared with the strike price, then as a put option holder, you will want to exercise it. So your payoff would be exercise price minus the stock price at expiration. And as I said, option contract is a zero-sum game. So the gain to the buyer would be the loss to the seller. That is, a seller's payoff and profit are just the negative number of the buyer's payoff and profit. And then we introduced futures contract. So futures contract basically represents obligations. That is, if you enter into a futures contract, then you will have the obligation to buy or sell the underlying asset at the futures price on the delivery date. And there are two sides of a futures contract. You could be on the long side. So if you're in a long position, then you commit yourself to buy the underlying asset on the delivery date at the predetermined futures price. And if you're in a short position, then you will have to commit yourself to sell this underlying asset on the delivery date at the predetermined futures price. And it's also costless to enter into a futures contract. So this is different from options contract, because if you're the buyer of a options contract, then you have to pay this options premium. But if you take a long position in the futures contract, you don't pay any premium. And then it's, again, important to understand how to calculate profit. So first, we discussed the futures contract profits at maturity. That is, futures contract profits on delivery date. And there are two cases. If you're taking a long position, then your profit is just the spot price on the delivery date minus the original futures price. So if you look at a timeline, let's say On day 0, you sign the contract. You entered into this futures contract. And the futures price is F0. And then on day T, the actual spot price or the market price of this commodity is PT. Then you can see that if you're taking a long position, your profit is just PT minus F0. This is easy to understand because if you're taking a long position in a futures contract, it means you will buy this commodity in the future at price F0. But the actual market price is PT. If it's higher than F0, then obviously you earn this difference, right? This will be your profit. Your profit would be PT minus F0. And then, just like options contract, futures contract is a zero-sum game. So the gain to the long side would be the loss to the short side. So you can see that if you enter the short position on day 0 with a future price of F0, and if the spot price on day T is PT, then your profit would be F0 minus PT. This is also easy to understand, right? Because it means if you're taking a long side of the futures contract, then you will have to sell this commodity at price F0 in the future. So F0 is your selling price. So if the market price is PT, then this PT is like your cost. So your profit would be F0 minus PT. Okay, notice that when we discussed the profit here, we mentioned we're calculating the profits at maturity. That is, your contract profits on delivery date. So these two formulas, that is, this formula and this formula, they're only applicable if you hold your futures contract until the delivery date, right? But you actually can exit your option contract before the delivery date. So now the question is, how could we calculate your profits from the futures contract before maturity, right? That is, let's say you're a buyer, right? You're taking a long position in the futures contract. And on day 0, you enter into this contract. And day T is the delivery date. And we have some other dates in the middle, right? So let's say the futures price on day 3 is F3. Now, what is your profit? Well, if you're taking a long position, your profit is just F3 minus F0. And if you're taking a short position, then your profit would be F0 minus F3, right? So basically you can generalize this. So let's say we're not just talking about date 3, we're talking about date T, right? So this is date T. And let's say on date T, the futures price for this contract is FT. So if you're in a long position and your profit on day T would be FT minus F0. That is, futures price on day T minus the original futures price on day 0. And if you're taking a short position in the contract, then your profit on day T would be F0 minus Ft. That is the original futures price on day T minus the future price on, oh, sorry. You know what? There's a typo here. This should be day 0. So the profit to short position on day T equals original futures price on day 0 minus the futures price on day T. So I will definitely make a correction on this. Okay. So both futures contract and option contract can be used for risk management. And these two contracts have their differences. The first difference is, let's say we are considering a case, you're taking a long position in option contract versus the case that you're taking a long position in the futures contract. Then you can see that if you're taking a long position in the options contract, then you have to pay the options premium to buy that option. But we know that you don't need to pay any premium to enter into a long position in a futures contract. The second difference is, if you're taking a long position in the options contract, the lowest payoff you can get is just 0. Because if the price goes against you, right, what you will do is you will just let the option contract expire. And this will give you 0 payoff. So basically, if you have a long position in the options contract, you have a lower bound in your payoff. And this lower bound is just 0. This is different for futures contract. If you have a futures contract, even if you're taking a long position, then your payoff in the end could be negative. We can see this from, first we can see this from pictures. So if you look at these 3 pictures, right? So basically for this picture on the left, we're discussing a firm's payoff in my long position for a futures contract. So it's a long position in futures contract, right? And this one is a firm's payoff in a long position in a call option, right? So if the firm has a long position in a call option, and F0 is the futures price. And what you can see here is, if the final market price, right, drops below F0, the firm will have negative profit from this contract. That is, the firm will have a loss. And this is different for a call option. If the market price drops below the call option's strike price, the payoff is just 0, right? So you can see that these 2 different types of contracts, options and futures, they have different risk profiles. However, you can see that there is a reason for this. It seems like call option is a better risk management tool, right? It feels like it gives you this downside protection. But remember that this benefit of call option has a cost. You have to pay a premium to buy call option, right? But you don't need to pay anything to enter into the long position of a futures contract. Okay. Okay, next we talk about a very important trading mechanism for futures contract. It's called marking to market. This is important because it's important for you to understand how futures contract work, and it's also important for you to understand why futures contract can be less risky because of this marking to market trading mechanism. Okay, so marking to market basically means each day the profits or losses from your futures contract will be calculated. And if you have earned profits, then this profits will be paid to you on that day. And if you have suffered losses, then the loss will be subtracted from your account. So you can see why this is called marking to market, because every day profits and losses will be calculated according to the market price. Okay, this sounds quite abstract, but let's see this example. It will help us to understand how marking to market works. So assume a 5-day maturity futures price for silver is currently 20.110 per ounce. Suppose that over the next 5 days, the futures price evolves as follows. Okay, so we have a table here. It tells us the futures price every day. Assume 5,000 ounces per contract. So here you can see that we have this so-called contract multiplier. It basically means if you want to take a long position in one contract, then you have to commit to buy 5,000 ounces of silver. Now calculate the daily mark to market settlements for each contract held by long position. So we're looking at the profits and losses for the long position. Remember that for a long position, it's profit. So let me write it here. So profit. Oops. So profit to a long position equals FT minus F0. Again, what are FT and F0? FT is really the futures price on day T, and F0 is the future price on day 0, the original date. So now we can calculate the profit and losses to the long position. Right, so let's say this is P&L. Okay, so on day 1, you can see that the profit would be F2 minus F1, right? Because this is essentially F2. This is F1. Of course, this is F3, F4, F5, oops. I used incorrect numbers. So this should be F0, F1, F2, F3, F4, F5. Right? So for day 1, the profit would be F1 minus F0. But this is just for 1 ounce of silver, right? Per contract, you have to commit to buy 5,000 ounces. So we have to use this 5,000 multiplier. And this will give us a number of, I believe it's 500, right? And what will happen is, on this day, right, you will get this 500 in your account. And then let's continue to do some other, let's look at other days. So this one would be F2 minus F1 times 5,000. And then this is still a profit. So I guess the number here should be 25. No, it's 250. So this means on day 2, your account will get another positive $250. And on day 3, it would be F3 minus F2 times 5,000. And in this case, you can see that F3 is actually smaller than F2. So you will have a negative profit. That is, you will have a loss. So the number here is minus 350. And this means on that day, on day 3, $350 will be deducted from your account. And then on day 4, it would be F4 minus F3 times 5,000. And you can see that F3 equals F4, so nothing happens. It's just 0. And on the delivery date, F5 minus F4 times 5,000. So this will be 150, I guess. Yeah, 150. Right? So what you can see here is if you add up these numbers, right? If you find sum of these numbers, it will be 550. That is, over the last 5 days, right? The accumulated profits and losses will be $550. And you can see that this is exactly your total profit you can get from taking a long position in this futures contract. Because we learned the profit for a long position in the futures contract on the delivery date is given by PT minus F0, right? Of course, we have 5,000 ounces. And we know that the last day's price is 20.21. And day 0's price is 2010 times 5,000. So this is exactly $550. Okay. So why do we want to use this marking to market? To put it simply, it's because you want to reduce the default risk, right? Because if you calculate this profit and loss only on the delivery day, then this profit and loss will be large. So the default risk will be larger. And if you calculate these small profits and losses on each day, then these numbers will be smaller. So it's easier for you to manage this default risk. Okay. Now, after discussing and reviewing options and futures, now we could finally talk about commodity risk management. So first, it's easy to understand that a lot of firms, they face commodity price risk. So you can imagine that if a firm uses a commodity as an input, then this firm will face commodity price risk, right? Because if the price of this commodity increases, then the cost of the input will be higher. So this will basically suppress this firm's profit margin. Of course, if the price of the commodity decreases, then the firm will be happy. The firm could get higher earnings because of lower commodity price. So one example is airlines, right? So you can imagine that if you're the CEO of Air Canada, you do care about the price of oil, right? Because if the price of oil is super high, then it will be hard for you to make money. So to better manage this commodity price risk, firm will think about different hedging techniques. So here, hedge or hedging is basically like in insurance. So the firm will use different techniques to offset the price risk from the commodity price changes. So we will discuss several different kinds of commodity price risk management. Sorry for this. Let me reopen this lecture note. Should I open this? Okay, so we want to discuss several different hedging methods to manage commodity price risk. Vertical integration, storage, long-term contract, futures contract, and option contract. We will discuss these 5 different methods, and I would say that the focus here would be futures contract and option contract. So first, vertical integration. So basically, vertical integration means you will merge 2 firms along the supply chain, right? So one example is Costco bought a chicken farm in the US. So first you can see that this is a vertical integration because the chicken farm is basically a supplier for Costco. So why Costco wants to do this? Well, because Costco wants to manage this commodity risk. Here, the commodity obviously refers to chickens. So what you can see here is if chicken price increases, then Costco will suffer and chicken farms will be happy, right? So if you can merge these 2 firms together, that is, if you merge Costco with chicken farms, then you can see that the gain to the chicken farmers will offset the loss of the Costco corporation, right? So in this case, you can see that the price fluctuations will be reduced or even eliminated. But you can see that vertical integration has its own risk because if, let's say, Costco actually buys a chicken farm, but this cannot completely eliminate risk. You can imagine that if there's a tornado, then this tornado destroys chicken farm. So even Costco has merged with this chicken farm, Costco will still suffer. Then the second obvious choice for managing commodity risk is to just buy this commodity and store it, right? For example, if you're Air Canada and you worry that in the future the fuel price will increase, what you can do is you can purchase a large quantity of fuel today and you store this fuel, let's say for 1 year, right? And then at least you can guarantee that for the next year, the price of the fuel will be fixed. But you can see that there are some downsides to this kind of hedging technique. The first is you have to pay potentially high storage costs. And you will have to incur a large cash outflow when you pay for this large quantity of fuels. And third, if you maintain a large inventory, this implies you will have very large current asset, and this will increase your working capital requirement. So this basically means you will manage your working capital in an efficient way, right? And then, because of these shortcomings, we can consider the hedging technique with long-term contract. So in this case, basically this firm will sign a long-term contract with a fixed price. In this case, you can see that using this contract, basically the firm will have a fixed price in the near future, right? For example, for Southwest Airlines, so in early 20th, Southwest signed long-term supply contract with a supplier, and this contract has a fixed price for fuel, and the price was fixed at $23 per barrel. And this actually benefited Southwest a lot, because later that year, the fuel price increased to above $30 per barrel. So you can see that because of this long-term contract, Southwest Airlines could expect that at least, let's say for the next year, its price will be fixed at $23, no matter what will the actual market price be in the future, right? So this basically eliminates the commodity risk. So here we can compare the this airline's earnings with hedging and without hedging. So this blue line, this flat blue line, tells us the firm's earnings with hedging. Basically, the horizontal axis is about the oil price, and the vertical axis is about earnings. So this flat blue line tells us with hedging, with this long-term contract, the firm's earnings are fixed no matter what is the oil price, right? So basically you can see that the firm eliminates the oil price risk using the long-term supply contract. And then you can see that the red line tells us the firm's earnings without hedging. What you can see here is this is a downward sloping curve. Basically, it says if oil price is higher, the firm's profit will be lower, right? So you can see that in this case, the firm will have more volatile earnings because of the oil price. And what you can see here is if the oil price is high, right? Let's say it's about $29 per barrel. In this case, you can see that the firm's earnings will be much lower compared with the earnings with hedging. So this vertical distance tells us what's the benefit from hedging. But you can see that hedging has its downside. Imagine that the oil price drops to let's say $18. If the firm has the hedging, it means the firm will still have to pay $23, right? Because of this long-term supply contract. But without hedging, the firm can actually benefit from this lower oil price, right? So that's why you will get higher earnings if the oil price becomes sufficiently low. So the vertical distance here tells us the loss because of hedging. But no matter you're looking at the loss or the gains, what you can see here is with hedging, the firm's earning is very smooth. Without hedging, the firm's earning is much volatile, right? Okay, now let's see this example. We consider a chocolate maker that will need 10,000 pounds of cocoa beans next year. The current market price of cocoa beans is 2,900 per ton. At this price, the firm expects EBIT of $44 million next year. So we have three questions. The first one is, what will the firm's EBIT be if the price of cocoa beans rises to 3,500 per ton? Second, what will EBIT be if the price of cocoa beans falls to $2,600 per ton? What will EBIT be in each scenario if the firm enters into a forward contract to buy cocoa beans for a fixed price of $2,950 per ton? Now, this is actually a very easy problem. So, first, it says if the price of cocoa beans increases to $3,500 per ton, and we know that the firm's EBIT is $44 million if the price of cocoa beans is $2,900 per ton. So you can imagine that if cocoa beans price increases from 2,900 to 3,500, then the firm's EBIT will be lower, right? Now the question is, how much lower? Well, it's easy because we know that the firm needs 10,000 tons of cocoa beans each year. So here we can see that if price is 3,500, then the firm's EBIT would be the original EBIT minus the increased cost because of the more expensive cocoa beans. So it's 35,000 minus 2,900 times the total number of cocoa beans. And this, I believe, it's $5 million. No, $6 million. Of course, this one is $44 million. So this should be 38. Let me check if I am correct. Okay, so it's $38 million. The second, if price of cocoa beans decreases to 2,600, then in this case should be 44 million plus. Now we should imagine that the firm's EBIT will increase, right? Because cocoa beans become cheaper. So it's 2,900 minus 2,600 times 10,000. So this would be $47 million. Now, for the third case, the firm enters into a forward contract to buy cocoa beans for a fixed price of 2,950 per ton. So you can imagine that no matter price is 3,500 or price is 2,600, the firm's EBIT should stay the same because the firm has this long-term supply contract. You could always buy this these cocoa beans at $2,950, right? So here EBIT is just 44 million plus, sorry, I should use minus, because you can see here the fixed price is a little higher compared with this $2,000, right? So it should be 2,950 minus 2,900 times the times 10,000. So I guess that This is $0.5 million. So we have for $3.5 million. Let me double check, right? Again, you can see that the result here is really the same as this picture here. What you see here is with this supply contract, because the firm pays a fixed price no matter what is the market price, then the EBIT is always fixed, so it will have a very smooth earnings. And then if the firm does not have this long-term supply contract, then its EBIT will change depending on what is the actual market price for cocoa beans, right? So if cocoa beans is expensive, the firm suffered. It has a lower EBIT. And if the cocoa beans become cheaper, then the firm will be happier. Then its EBIT is $47 million. Okay. So this long-term supply contract looks like a perfect solution, right? But it has some drawbacks. The first is the other party could potentially default, right? For example, in the last example, we discussed this cocoa beans long-term contract. Well, even if you have signed this long-term contract with a cocoa beans farm, then maybe in the future, due to some other reasons, the cocoa beans farm could just default. So you still couldn't buy your cocoa beans at the predetermined fixed price, right? So basically, the possibility of default risk means the long-term supply contract can insulate the firm from commodity price risk, but it exposes these firms to credit risk because the other party might default. And long-term supply contract cannot be entered into anonymously. That is, the buyer and the seller, they will know each other's identity. So this lack of anonymity may have some disadvantages. So maybe, right, as a cocoa beans buyer, you wanted to keep your identity in secret because you don't want your competitors to know how many tons of cocoa beans you want to buy, right? So in this case, if you sign this long-term supply contract, you would essentially reveal your identity to your supplier, to this cocoa beans farm. So it's possible your identity will be leaked to your competitors. This will give you some disadvantage. And the third disadvantage is the value of this contract is hard to determine. Well, because this is a contract signed between two firms, right? There is no market price for you to track gains and losses. And it could be difficult for you to exit your contract. For example, if you have signed this long-term supply contract with this cocoa beans farm, and in the middle, you want to quit. If it's a long-term supply contract, you can see that it will be very hard, right? Because if you quit in the middle, it basically means you will breach your contract. So because of these different disadvantages, we will discuss futures. And you can see that futures will actually solve these disadvantages. We have discussed futures, right? We have introduced some concepts about futures contract. Here again, we discuss futures contract. So futures contract obligates the buyer and seller to trade a commodity at the futures price and on this delivery date. So futures contracts have several features which will solve the disadvantages of long-term supply contract we just mentioned. So first, futures contract, they are traded anonymously on an exchange. So you can see that this will solve the second disadvantage, right? It basically means if you enter into this long futures contract for cocoa beans, no one would know who you are, right? So this could provide some advantage to you. And futures contract, they have market price. So this will make it easier for you to track gains and losses from this futures contract. And future contracts are generally very liquid. So this means it will be easy for you to get out of the contract because it's easier for you to find buyers or sellers of the contract. And both the buyers and the seller can get out of the contract at any time. You can just sell your futures contract to a third party through this exchange, right? Let's say you have entered a long side in this cocoa beans futures contract. Then in the middle, you want to get out of the contract. What you can do is you can just sell this contract to a third party through this exchange. And the third benefit of futures contract compared with this long-term supply contract is futures contract can eliminate credit risk. We mentioned that the first disadvantage is the other party of this long-term supply contract can default. So long-term supply contract has credit risk. But future contract can eliminate credit risk. So how futures contract can eliminate credit risk? Well, through the mechanism we discussed before. So basically marking to market can solve this credit risk problem. Okay, so in more details, futures contract have two mechanisms to solve this default risk problem. First, both sides, that is the long side and the short side, they are required to post the margins. And margins are essentially collaterals. So with collaterals, then you can see that the default risk will be very small. And then the second important mechanism is marking to market and daily settlement. That is, the gains and losses will be computed every day based on different future prices. And then buyers and sellers will pay for any losses and will get paid for any gains as they occur, right? So they don't need to wait until the final delivery date to realize their gains and losses. So as long as the margin balance, again, margin is a type of collateral. So as long as the collateral is sufficient to cover the daily settlement, that is the daily gains and daily losses, then there will be no risk of default. Okay, now let's see a different example of marking to market and how to calculate losses and gains. So here we're looking at a oil futures contract, and we have so this is a very long futures contract. It's a 900-day futures contract, right? And we have all these future prices on the second row. And on the third row, we're looking at the daily losses and gains. And on the last row, we're looking at the accumulated gains and losses. So you can see that the futures price on day 0 is 57. And on day 1, the future price is 55. Now you can see that so if you have a long position, right? Again, this table is about a long position. So if you have a long position, then you can see that your profit is F1 minus F0, which is 55 minus 57, which is minus 2, right? So the daily settlement means you will have a loss of minus $2. That is, $2 will be deducted from your account. And then we continue to move on to the second day. On day 2, then you can see that 56 minus 55, you will get this $1 profit. So $1 of profit will be deposited into your account. And you can see that the cumulative profit or loss would be minus 2 plus 1, right? It's minus 1. So this minus 1 is exactly equal to 56 minus 57. That is F2 minus F0. And you can pick, let's say you're looking at the day 899. On this day, you can see that you have a profit, right? 34 minus 32. This gives you a $2 profit. And your cumulative loss would be 23. And then you can see that 23 equals 899. Oh, sorry, it's not 899. So equals 34 minus 57. That is F899. That is futures price on day 899 minus futures price on day 0, right? And then you can also look at the delivery date. So what you can see here is on delivery date, your cumulative loss is 22. 22 equals PT minus F0. That is 35 minus 57, right? So what will actually happen on delivery date is you will buy the oil at the market price, $35. However, you have lost $22, right? And you already have a loss of $22. So this is equivalent to say you pay $57 to buy the oil. So it's exactly this futures price. Okay. And also you can see that this is a good way to manage default risk, right? Because every day these little gains and losses are calculated and paid or get paid, right? So these small settlements will manage this default risk well and prevent these two sides to default on their promise. Okay. Now, the last one is about options contract. So to use options contract for hedging, then you can imagine that if a firm needs to buy a commodity in the future, then it should use a call option to hedge against the price risk, right? This is easy to understand. So let's say a company let's say a firm wants to buy cocoa beans, right? And is worried about the potential price increase in the future. So let's say there is a call option. And let's say this call option is based on 100 tons of cocoa beans. Let's say its strike price is $3,000 per ton. Now, why this call option contract can be used to hedge against the price risk? Well, because if the firm buys this call option, it means the firm has the right to purchase cocoa beans at the 3,000 strike price. Now you can imagine, let's say in the future, right? Let's say this is a 1 year call option. So let's say after 1 year, the market price of cocoa beans is 4,000. Then you can see that the firm will be happy because the firm will exercise the call and buy cocoa beans at $3,000. And you can see that if the market price is 5,000, again, the firm can buy cocoa beans at $3,000. Of course, you can see that if the market price decreases to 2,000, in this case, the firm will just let the call option expire. It will just buy the cocoa beans at $2,000 market price. Well, because a firm which needs to buy a commodity in the future needs to hedge by using a call option, then you can imagine that if a firm needs to sell a commodity in the future, then it can hedge by using a put option. So let's say you're a cocoa bean farm, right? So now we're thinking about a cocoa bean farm. So this cocoa bean farm wants to sell cocoa beans. And this farm worries about the potential price decrease in the future. And what the firm can do is it can buy a, let's say, 1 year put option, right? So this put option will give the cocoa beans farm the right to sell 100 tons of cocoa beans at a $3,000 strike price. So let's say after 1 year, the market price drops to $2,000. Well, the firm will still be able to sell at $3,000, right? The cocoa bean farm will just exercise this put option and sell 100 tons of cocoa beans at $3,000 per ton. And then if market price drops to $1,000, still the cocoa bean farm exercises the put option and sell the cocoa beans at $3,000. So this will hedge against the price decrease in the future from the cocoa bean farm's perspective. Of course, you can see that if the market price surges, right? If the market price surges to $4,000, now in this case, the cocoa bean farm will not exercise the put option. It will let the put option expire. It will sell cocoa beans in the market for a higher market price at $4,000. Now, from the hedging's perspective, there will be differences in options and futures. We actually have discussed this in the last section when we reviewed options and futures. So first, the cash flows are different. For an option contract, the buyer must pay a premium to get to buy this options contract. But there's no margin requirement for option buyers. And there are no daily settlements of losses and gains for option buyers. And futures contract is different. There is no cost to enter into this futures contract. But there is margin requirement and there are daily settlements. And it's also different from the perspective of obligation and right. So option gives you the buyer right. It means the buyer can just let this option expire if it's not profitable to exercise the option. But futures contract, if you enter into this futures contract, then you will have the obligation. It means no matter whether the market price rises or falls, if you're taking a long position in the futures contract, you will have to always pay the futures price. You will buy it at the futures price. Right? So this is a very simple table. To summarize what to do if you want to hedge against price risk. So here we have the firm which wants to buy the commodity in the future. And because you're the buyer, then you're worried about a price increase. So if you want to use futures, then you will take a long position in the futures contract because you will be able to make the purchase at a fixed price, the futures price, right? Or you could use options. You can purchase a call option. And if the market price is too high, you can exercise your call and you can buy at the strike price. And the market price is too low, you will let the call option you will let the call option expire and you will buy at a lower price. And then and then the second case is a firm wants to sell. So in this case, if you're a seller, you will be worried about a potential price decrease, right? So if you want to use futures, you will enter the short side of the futures contract. It means you will be able to sell at the fixed price. Or you could purchase a put option. So in this case, if price is too low, you can exercise your put option and sell at the strike price. If the market price becomes too high, then you will also be happy. You will just let the put option expire, and then you can basically sell at a higher market price. Okay, now let's look at this example here. So it's April, and Magda is planting her canola crop. She expects to grow 1,000 metric tons of canola and sell it in November. And then on the same day, Japan Canola Crushers, JCC, is planning on buying 1,000 metric tons of canola in November. So both the farmer and JCC, they're concerned about the price for canola in November. And then the following futures and options contracts are available. So the first one is the futures contracts for delivery in November with a future price of 600 per metric ton. And then there is a call option on canola. It expires in November. Its strike price is 600. And there is cost for this call option. It's $34 per option. And there is also a put option on canola. And the expiration is November. The strike price is $600 per metric ton. And the put option costs $36. Now, the question is, what contracts can Magda and JCC use to hedge against the price risk? What prices can Magda and JCC get under these contracts? So, first you can see that Magda is a seller, right? And JCC is a buyer. And we said you can both use futures and options to hedge against the price risk. So basically, the answer to the first question is Magda and JCC both can use futures contract. To be more specific, Magda, who is a seller, will enter the short side of the futures contract. And JCC, who is a buyer, will enter into the long side of this futures contract. And Magda and JCC can also use options. And Magda will want to use a put option because Magda is a seller. And JCC will want to use a call option. So to write this down, right? Magda can have a short position in futures, or it can buy a put option. And JCC, the buyer, can have a long position in futures, or it can buy a call option. Okay, what price can Magda and JCC get under these contracts? So let's first think about the case of futures. Right? So let's say Magda enters the short side of the futures contract and JCC enters the long side of the futures contract. And the futures contract has a futures price of 600 metric ton. And you can see that if both of them use futures, then it means Magda will be able to sell at 600 and JCC will be able to buy canola at $600, right? So this basically means Magda will be able to sell at $600. And for JCC, it will be able to buy at $600. Okay, let's say Magda and JCC decide to use options. So let's say Magda decides to buy put option. And what you can see here is she needs to pay $34 to buy the option, right? So this means she needs to pay $34 per option. And now we have to think whether Magda will want to exercise this option or not. So if the market price, okay, you know what, I will remove the futures and I will write the put option here because I'm running out of space, right? So put options, Magda needs to pay $34 per option. Oh, by the way, you can see that she has a total output of 1,000 metric tons, and the one option is just $34 per metric ton. So she needs to buy 1,000 options, which means the total cost of the call option would be 34 times 1,000. Okay, she pays $34 per option. Now, there are two cases. If canola price is larger than 600, remember this call option has a strike price of 600. This basically means Magda will not exercise this put option, right? So it will just sell at the market price. Let's say market price is smaller than $600. Now in this case, Magda will want to exercise this put option. So she will be able to sell canola at $600, right? So this basically means if market price is smaller than $600, she will be able to sell at $600, and the per option price is 34. So her net revenue is 600 minus 34 times 1,000 tons, right? I don't know what's the total number. Let's see if so it's 56400. It's 56400. And if the market price is larger than 600, then Magda's profit is market price minus the cost of option times 1,000 tons. Clearly, we don't know what is the market price. If market price is 1,000, then you will just use 1,000 minus 34 times 1,000. Right? Okay. JCC will have call options. Again, the call option is actually $34. So JCC will pay $34 per option. Oops, I think I used some wrong numbers here. Sorry. So for put option, the price is actually $36. So I should use 36 here. And 36 here. So if JCC buys call option, again, we have to think about whether JCC wants to exercise the call option or not. So let's discuss the market price. So let's say the market price denoted by P is larger than 600. Well, in this case, JCC will want to exercise its call option, right? So it will be able to buy this canola, buy this 1,000 tons of canola at $600, right? So it will spend $600. And if the market price P is smaller than $600, then JCC will not want to exercise its call. It will let the call option expire, so it will just pay the market price P. Of course, JCC has also spent $34 for this call option, so its cost would be its price on canola plus the call option price times 1,000 tons. So this would give us 634,000. Okay, so this one is basically about calculating prices under these different contracts. I know at this stage it might be a little confusing because you have to understand whether the firm wants to exercise the call or not, and the long side of the futures contract and the short side of the futures contract. So work on this problem to make sure you get familiar with these concepts. Okay, that's for today's class.